Dr. Bill, can you hear us?
Yeah, I did. You connected quicker than I thought.
Okay, well, let's see what we can do here. Just before we dive into this headlong, let me just do a little introduction to what's going to be a recorded interview here. But
oh, by the way, I heard you had some trouble with the sound quality of our other recording. I guess you had some issues there, right?
Yeah, it's salvageable, and I'm working on it. So it hasn't all been lost, but I've got to do a lot of fancy audio stuff to get it to sound like two people talking to each other.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, you want it to be so that people can actually understand it when they hear it.
Too right. But at the moment, the audio quality sounds pretty good. And let me just do a...
Yeah, we're actually doing pretty good today. Skype is kind today.
Skype is kind. The angels are smiling on us. Very good.
Yeah,
So listen, here we go. Let's pretend we're all in California here. And this is Wednesday, the 14th of April, 2010. And it's Bill Ryan here from Project Avalon. And I'm delighted to be talking to Bill Deagle. And this is an interesting one for me because I don't actually know what Dr. Bill wants to talk to me about, but he sent me a message that gave me cause to believe that there was something pretty exciting, important, interesting that he had to share, and maybe we better shape up and pay a little bit of attention. And so, Dr. Bill, I'm going to do a lot of listening. And tell me what you have been exploring since we last spoke about a month ago.
Well, if what I've found is correct, it's a very significant breakthrough. It's transformative news. It may not be good, but it's good for us if we, as I say, we take the right approach to what's going to happen. And Bill said this many times. We've signed up to be here at this time in the events and history of this type of sentient being in this sector of the universe in this time and space for a reason to advance our understanding of what we are. And I think that the events can be both transformatively positive or destructively negative, but it depends on our response, and both on the spiritual, physical, and preparative level to it, so that we don't end up finding that these events are the ones to brew our civilization away or to allow us to transform to a higher order. The exploration actually started many, many years ago, collecting the evidence, and the most driven person when you finally get the truth is a skeptical person. It's the opposite of what you'd otherwise assume. The skeptic, when they have the truth after they've really pursued all the things that might otherwise prove that it's wrong, is more driven than anybody else. So I've been very skeptical about things. Like, for example, I was skeptical about the 2012 issues. I was skeptical about the issues of, what's going to happen, and not only at the 2012 period, but the approaching, quote, Planet X, dwarf star. What are the cycles of the galaxy that are based on science and facts? So I want to quote different science things, so when people reference back, they can go back and actually say, well, we can check this book or that book. For example, I'll start off with a couple of different facts, and then I'll pull it together. The first thing that I'll make a couple of assertions. The first thing is that earthquakes and volcanism happen in cycles that happen with the precession of the equinox. Now, it takes 26,000 years for us to rotate around the galaxy, but it actually, because of the rotation of the sun and the other things, that effectively is reduced to 23,000 years, and we have this precession effect that happens at halfway through that, or 11,500 years. And every 11,500 years, there is a reversal of the magnetic field of the poles of the Earth.
Right.
The magnetic reversal occurs. It occurs with an increasing crescendo of earthquakes and volcanoes, which release sulfur dioxide, increase rainfall, and push us into an ice age. And that's in the geological record. You can actually find the record in volcanic rocks and rocks in the Canadian Shield and around the world, that these events happen on cycles, just like the Mayans talked about. And there's little cycles. This is one of the bigger cycles. There's an even bigger cycle of grand ice ages that happen roughly every 105,000 years.
Right. And there are a lot of earthquakes happening right now. It's kind of hard to ignore them, right?
Well, I'm going to explain a little bit more about why they're happening and what we should be doing to see why they're happening and where they're happening, where the danger is, and what technology I'm certain they have, but they're not releasing it to the public or the news or FEMA or any preparedness organization in any country, and I'll explain what's going on.
Okay.
Volcanoes and earthquakes are a plasma event. Plasma is basically just charged particles, and we live in a plasma universe, an electric universe.
Yep.
So if you go and get books like Thunderbolts of the God by David Talbot, if you look at books like 2012 by Larry Joseph, if you look at all these different things, the electric universe, you're going to find all kinds of documentation. We live in a plasma universe, and in fact, in the times of the ancient Greeks, there was evidence that in the conjunction of planets, plasma jumped across the intersolar space and caused worms to crawl to the ground and snakes. For example, before an earthquake in Sichuan, China that occurred, I think it was a little over a year ago, the snakes crawled under the ground because it was wintertime in Sichuan and they froze to death. The same way as the frogs before that earthquake, by the millions were jumping out of their frog places where they were and even going across the highway in the millions. And I've got pictures of it. Mm-hmm. You'll see evidence that there's also a plasma discharge you can see in the sky. They call them earthquake lights, and that can occur naturally and also can be induced as a way of triggering an earthquake.
Yep.
And what I was told, and this is firsthand, this is not secondhand, that as the U.S. Space Command, we have, people call it HARP, but it's scalar weapons. Again, it's not just HARP, which pumps it up into the upper atmosphere. They can pump it through the Earth as well. Specific frequencies to create what's called an interferometry field, meaning you have two different crossing fields at least, or more, that'll create a secondary or tertiary frequency that will be the correct frequency that's harmonic with a tectonic plate. That plate will absorb the energy and the rocks vibrate in synchrony with that energy. As the energy rises, it increases the vibration in the rocks, and you hear an echo. You can actually listen to this if you have the proper equipment, so the rocks responding, just like an opera singer can hear a glass on the opposite side of a room singing back in response to her modulating her voice. And if you hit the right frequency, that will build what's called a giant wave inside the rock, and the mu, or resistance between the rock faces, will drop towards zero, and the rock will release its energy, either all or portion of the energy. Yeah. It's called a piezoelectric slip threshold. Now, that can happen naturally, and when you have an earthquake, every earthquake is a foreshock of another earthquake and also an aftershock of another one. So the earthquakes that happened in 1994 in Los Angeles is a foreshock of other earthquakes that could occur even decades later. And the reason is there's a transfer of energy to rocks up and down the fault line and all the many tectonic plates, and there's roughly, I think, in the low 20s number of plates. And one of the big plates, for example, the plates have been cracking lately. One of the big ones was a crack of the plate in the ocean near Aceh, Sumatra, Indonesia, that actually cracked the tectonic plate 700 miles, and it went right through the entire crust of the Earth down, I think, about 20, 30 miles. There was an earthquake a decade ago in Colombia that caused a major mudslide, or they call them lahar, where you have glaciers and mud and everything comes down the side of the mountain, pulls rocks. And that lahar was caused by a superquake that occurred that cracked through the South American plate right in Colombia.
Right.
So these, level 6, 7, 8 level earthquakes are increasing now. They're almost every couple of weeks. We have another earthquake somewhere in the world. I just got another report today. There was a major quake that hit China that killed hundreds of people just, I think, today.
That's right. Yeah.
Right. Now, here's what's happening. Think of the Earth as a rotating ball of jello with pineapple slices as the tectonic plates floating on it. Now, as the Earth changes, either is perturbed by something else, whether it's a incoming large dwarf star or it's a precession of the equinox, you get the jostling of these jello slices, the tectonic plates, and the way the energy is released is interesting because it's locked up in the rocks. Like, for example, the thrust zone in Los Angeles has got about 6 feet of stored vertical thrust in the rocks. And the San Andreas fault that goes all the way from the Baja, they call it something else down there, by the way, south of the U.S.-Mexican border, but it's still the San Andreas fault line. So they'll try to lie to tell people, like they did in the news, that it wasn't San Andreas that went off in Baja, but it's the same fault. Okay?
Okay.
So what happens is, if you get a solar mass ejection or a increased sunspot activity, or what's going on right now, they have a giant tail. It was called, one of these plasma tails. It's millions of miles long out from the sun, and you can actually go on the SOHO and satellites right now online, and you can see this giant tail spinning around and waving in space because the sun's starting to change its activity. It's starting to rev up in the end of solar cycle 24. It's been very quiet, down to about 5% or less of its normal sunspot activity. But solar mass ejections and solar reversals, which is when the sun flips its pole every 11 years, it flips, which is what we call a sun cycle. The poles of the sun flip every 11 years.
Right.
Right?
Yep.
Now, on the Earth, they flip every 11,500 years, but if you have a convergence of one or more cycles, so you've got a polar cycle that's going to flip in